Who? 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 Were you a fucking owl?
Good morning, Vietnam!
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel the need for need for speed.
Roads? When we're going, we don't need roads.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Batman.
Hello and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. You join us in this rather dreary summer day. It's now officially summer in Scotland, so therefore, yeah, all the good weather is fucked off and left us with the usual sort of shite. Today, I am joined by a person who never knowingly gets attached to anything. In fact, she is probably well known for having no attachments to a pod that she can't leave within 30 seconds and disappear into the night. Mary, how the hell are you doing?
I am coming to you from a secret location because obviously, you know, the minute you feel the heat coming around the corner.
All will become apparent.
I'm very well. The sunburn has disappeared, so I now just look like a squashy, but without the pain attached to it, which is lovely. And you're right, it's Scottish summer, so it's raining sideways, but there's still midges. So it's a happy mix.
Yeah, absolutely. They managed to find their way in between the raindrops. I don't know how they do it, but yeah, they should market that. Today we are back on our 1995 marathon. We are talking about two crime films today in the form of Heat and Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. These were two of the more prominent sort of crime films of the year, and thought they were pretty much worth a decent conversation. So let us start with Heat.
He's here. I can feel it.
You search for the scent of your prey, and then you hunt them down. That's the only thing you're committed to.
It keeps me sharp, on the edge, where I gotta be. You want to be making moves on the street? Allow nothing to be in your life that you cannot walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner. My life's a disaster zone because I spend all my time chasing guys like you around the block. I do what I do best. I take scores. You do what you do best, trying to stop guys like me.
As I say, 1995 film directed by Michael Mann, and is particularly famous for the fact that it paired up Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in a film where they actually had scenes together. This is based, the whole publicity for this film was absolute genius, in that it focused on the fact that these two heavyweight actors who in the mid-90s were pretty much at the top of the game, but they obviously were together in The Godfather Part 2, but never had any scenes due to the fact that Godfather Part 2 was a sequel and a prequel at the same time. Mm-hmm. So therefore, there was never a crossover between the two of them. So it's like on screen together for the first time, big sort of news articles and things like that. So yes, that's the sort of background to why it's such a big film. The film itself is actually relatively straightforward. It's the story of a gang of thieves, very sort of high-end thieves, who do heist jobs to order, and they come across a job that they do, and at the same time the LAPD start to figure out who they are, and it's a bit of a cat and mouse game for the best part of 2.5-3 hours here, where the gang are still trying to carry out the heist because it's worth the risk. It's always worth the risk. And the LAPD who are slowly closing in on them. And it sounds very simple, but there's quite a lot to it. Now, Mary, we've obviously mentioned this a few times. You were not very sort of aware of a lot of movies around about the old 1995 mark, you know.
No, a wee bit young to go and see this at the cinema.
Yes. So obviously you have seen it since then, and obviously you probably watched it again for the pod as we are talking about it today. What were your recollections of it? Do you remember it for a start before we actually decided to review it? And you know, what were your remembrances from it?
Yeah, I definitely remember this being billed as obviously say like two titans of cinema getting together for the first time. It obviously contains one of my very, very first cinema crushes, Val Kilmer, and I know that he seemed to get like a lot of heat for his performance in this film. But I actually, on having watched this again like yesterday, I'm like, what was so bad about it? I mean, yes, he's got quite a dodgy wig, but I mean, like that doesn't make the part. I think he's actually really good in this. I remembered the last time I watched it, I remembered I really liked the score. I thought it was really sort of like, it had this sort of like grimy, sort of gritty feel to it as well. And just generally being very entertaining. Like I couldn't believe when I went to put it on yesterday, it said like run time like 2 hours 58 minutes, and I was like, I don't ever remember this film feeling this long. And having watched it again, yes, I mean, it definitely doesn't. Like, it's got a clear 3-act structure to it. It's, you know, there's a lot going on besides the sort of Vincent Neil dynamic. Like there's a lot of kind of subplots as well that I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, having rewatched it yesterday, I'm just like, this is the fucking peak of cinema, and nothing will ever change my mind on this. Like, it's such a good film. And interestingly, I mean, I do think a film like this would get made now, but it would probably go to Netflix, and there would probably be an article about, you know, when to take your toilet breaks to go along with it, because it's quite a weighty, quite a substantial film. But yeah, I just think everyone in this film's on top of their game, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I did see it at the cinema at the time, and I wasn't a great fan of the Val Kilmer performance in this. I think I've mentioned before about him rocking up to the counter, you know, where are the explosives, that kind of idea, you know. But I have revised that opinion because I just don't think I don't know, whatever reason I didn't like it, but when I watched it this time, I thought, yes, far better. It's actually really intrinsic to the plot, because I originally said this film could be 3/4 of an hour shorter if Val Kilmer wasn't in it.
You did say that, yeah.
It did, but I've totally changed my mind on that. It's
good. I'm glad.
It's really intrinsic to the whole story of it as well. So I was pleasantly surprised in that regard, and I obviously, apart from that, I remembered it quite fondly and enjoyed it, and that opinion has not changed at all. I just think it's a really, really good film itself. Now, the film is basically a remake of a previous Michael Mann film called LA Takedown, which I think was a TV movie from about a decade before. Had you ever seen that one?
No, I was aware that he'd sort of remade his own work, and I was aware that I thought it was a TV series, not a made-for-TV film, but I haven't ever seen that. But I'd be now interested to go back and try and find that and sort of make a point of comparison and see how it looks and sounds and reads, because I feel like this film is like really, like the dialogue and the script is really central to a lot of it, and like in terms of like characterization and things like that. So it'd be interesting to sort of compare, has his writing improved over like a decade? Is that how he's finessed it? Has he fleshed the characters out? Like it would be interesting to see it.
Well, it's shorter for a start.
Yeah, well, there's that as well, yeah.
Yeah. I've seen bits and pieces of it. I've not seen the full film, and it's really just sort of comparison videos of what's in Heat and what's in LA Takedown. And a lot of it is similar in terms of the action, but it's obviously been beefed up and rethought in terms of Heat. But there's an awful lot more in terms of character development and all that in Heat than there is in LA Takedown, because of budgets more than anything else. And yeah, I think he had this idea and he thought, I can improve on this, I can do it better. So he's obviously been given permission and the money, more like the money rather than the permission, in order to do that. So yes, I think it's a much stronger film than the original one, but I think just in a purely historical term, yeah, you should try and seek it out if possible. I will probably have a look for it after we've done this, just for completeness, I think. So, like I say, the premise of the film is there's basically two competing forces here. There are quite clearly the good guys and the bad guys. Now, the good guys aren't good guys all the time, obviously, because the police have to use certain methods in order to try and get information. So, what did you think initially in terms of the introductions of these two teams? Now, the way that it happens is you're introduced to the bad guys first as they are doing preparation and carrying out a job, and then you're introduced to the Al Pacino character first, and then you're introduced to his whole team as they start to react to this initial heist that went down. So how do you think that was handled?
I think the characters are established really well. Like the film obviously plunges you straight in to the action. You've got this sort of pulse-like soundtrack and the sort of sweeping camera movements that follow Neil Macaulay, played by Robert De Niro. And then within about 10 minutes of the film starting, you get this really ambitious siege where these banking trucks are flipped and blown up. There's the huge armed robbery. There's the gorgeous close-up of that security man, sort of 1,000-yard stare just before he gets, sprayed with bullets. And then obviously you get a sense that these men or whoever that are part of this gang, so obviously they've got masks on, are extremely dangerous, and that actually there was no need for them to kill any of these men because their faces weren't revealed, and yet they did it anyway. And they obviously make away, I think it's like over $1 million in bearer bonds, and they're timing themselves as well, so they get in and out in less than 3 minutes, so you know that they're good at what they do as well. So you get the sense that they're very dangerous, very organized, and obviously the best at what they do. And then you have Al Pacino, his character Vincent Hanna, arriving with his like squad or police squad, whatever you want to call it. And they seem really on the back foot, really flustered, really can't work out, how they've managed to escape because there's so many different routes that they could take. They can't work out who this gang are, but they know that the heists are getting bigger and bigger. And from there, what I love throughout the film is the way that the two characters of Vincent and Neil actually mirror each other. So you often get shots of them sort of walking in somewhere with their crew, and they're done in kind of exactly the same way. And then there's this constant thing throughout the film, rather, in between the two of them, where, Neil has no family, no love, just his work. And Vincent is on marriage number 3. So they're both kind of messed up, but equally dogged in their own way at what they do. Al Pacino is always in sort of like these blacks and brown suits. Robert De Niro is always in the greys. And we basically watch them through like 3 acts. So there's like the chase, the heist, and the aftermath. And I feel like it's when we get to the aftermath that their characters are at their most sort of like unraveled throughout the film. And yeah, I mean, I just absolutely love the way that these characters sort of like play off each other, even when they're not on screen, because whatever they do obviously impacts the other. And yeah, I think the introduction to them is fascinating because it sets up the paths that these characters are obviously going to take, which are not entirely dissimilar for the rest of the film.
Yes, it's made quite clear early on that they come from very similar backgrounds. They both were Marines, and that has kind of shaped the people they've actually become. Obviously, there's been a divergence in the path at some point, and they've gone from military into crime or solving crime. I really like the introduction of the gang because, like you say, it was a precision, but there were elements in it they couldn't handle because they needed an extra person in it, and they had to get somebody in very short notice. And the guy they got in was a complete nut job. He was just, he was crazy. He
scares me so much, that character.
He was just, a bit sort of out of it all the time. Wayne Grow, that was his character. That was the character name. And he was brought in to be the extra man, basically just to be an extra gun. And you could tell that all he wanted to do was like kill people. That's what he was all about. Yeah. So the fact that he was brought in last minute, and that kind of threw the plans to a certain extent. But the way that they reacted to him shooting the security guard was that they thought, well, there wasn't even like a discussion or even like anything like a glance or anything between the others. They just shot them all because then they just need to get rid of all the witnesses. They need to do them all. And then obviously got away, and obviously there's repercussions because of the fact that there was the murder. Then that introduced the LA homicide department because they wouldn't have been involved in like the robbery department would have been involved in it, but it went up that sort of step because it involved killing multiple people and the fact that it was all well organized. But yeah, I know what you mean about the introduction of the LAPD. They were on the back foot. They didn't seem as organized, but that was very quickly changed by Vincent being in charge of them and saying, you do this, you do that. And then you saw, they were reacting to a scene that was chaos all around them at the time. So it was a bit chaotic with everything they were doing. So therefore they weren't really able to assert themselves in terms of like managing the scene, like getting down to it. But Vincent came in and just went, right, this is what you're going to do. This, you do this, do this, this. And he explained everything, even though probably the other guys knew bits and pieces of it, but he went right through it from start to finish. This is what they did here. This is why they did it. Escape routes, all this kind of thing. They knew exactly how long it was going to take. They put the
police to respond, because he knew they'd worked out how long a police response time was to a certain code, which obviously was like an armed robbery code, which I thought was a nice little touch as well, because it shows you his knowledge of like the system that he works in, but also shows you Neil's knowledge of the system that he obviously plays against, which I thought was a nice little touch.
Yeah, like you say, the two main performances, they are leading their teams here, so you're spending the majority of the film with either Neil or Vincent in this case, so that is quite a responsibility in terms of carrying a film. Now we've got two top-notch actors here doing this. What did you think of the main performances here and the contrasts between them?
Yeah, so I'll start off with Robert De Niro as Neil, because I feel like that maybe makes a bit of sense. I feel like he imbues him with this sort of really obvious hypervigilance, like his hands twitch even as he's sitting down at a meal, his eyes are scanning the room, he never looks relaxed. You can tell this is a man who's constantly seeking where his exits are. And yet when he meets like Edie for the first time, for example, like there's this change in him, not a softening necessarily, because he's rude to her at first. He's like, why are you asking so many questions, why are you so interested in who I am? But then he takes her out to look over the lights over LA, and he says, I'm alone but not lonely, which I think is a really interesting little character sort of giveaway. But I really liked his characterization in the sense that, as I say, you felt like he was a man who always had his eye on the exits. And then sort of conversely, you've got Al Pacino's Vincent, who, as you say, comes in, makes a mark on his team. He wants to get this solved. He knows exactly what he's doing. But then when the two of them sit down together, I feel like that kind of swaps. I feel like you get Vincent's nervous energy and Neil actually sort of retreats within to himself. And there's a stillness there that you don't get for the rest of the film. And I just love the fact that Al Pacino seems slightly nuts in it at times. Like there is a scene where he goes to question one of his informants and he starts singing like, oh, he'll probably leave a note on the door for you, and his eyes are like this blazing black anger, which I feel like only Al Pacino can do. And as I've said to you, this film does give me my favourite line in cinema, I think, about the who are you, a fucking owl, which I think is brilliant as well. But there's a danger in Vincent, and we see that he has a temper. Like, I absolutely love the scene where his petty ass takes that TV out of his apartment and takes it into his police car and drives around with it because he doesn't want his wife's new bit on the side to watch his TV. Like, there's a sort of an element of like anger and danger there that actually you don't really see in Neil that often, because even when like Neil in his career like robbing the bank, he's like, if you've got a heart problem, just stand against the wall, cool yourself down. Like, would you ever expect a top-notch like burglar to say anything like that? Like, the dynamic between who they are as people is so fascinating, both when they're apart and when they're together. And obviously, I mean, it's Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. You're not going to get anything other than a flawless performance from the two of them, as I say, whether they're acting together or in separate scenes. So I think that, yeah, to me, this is almost like not just peak 90s cinema, but like peak cinema. And it is thanks to their performance. But not just that, it is thanks to the dialogue as well. Like, I think this is a very like character-driven story, for all that it does have a lot of violence and a lot of sort of dramatic stunts in it. And yeah, I think the fact that you've got those kind of iconic speeches about, you shouldn't have anything you can't walk out in 30 seconds. And for me, the sun rises and sets with her. Like, I love all that dialogue. It just gives you such a huge clue as to who these people are. And obviously their physical performances then sort of elevate that to the next level. I mean, what can I say? It's phenomenal. Yes. Yeah, you are totally right. Because these are actors who know exactly what they're doing. They've honed their craft over a number of years. They rarely put a foot wrong, and they've obviously worked out between them that they both can't be larger than life. They have to have, there has to be a certain differentiation between the two of them. Now, the way that they do that is the character of Neil is quite still. He is centered. He's obviously, there's a lot going on under the surface with him as well, but he is more of a character that kind of holds it together as much as possible. And part of and there are certain
things that he needs to do. He has to be alone in order to do that. He can't have the attachments. Like, goes back to what we were saying at sort of the top of the introduction. You can't have anything that you can't walk out of within 30 seconds when the heat's around the corner, because, and then obviously that's mentions the title of the film, so we could have stood up, applauded, and walked out.
No, we could have, yeah.
So, which I didn't actually think about at the time, which is quite interesting. But yeah, it's a sort of counterbalance with the character of Al Pacino. He is always on the verge of just going out of control. You feel as if it wouldn't take very much. Now it's almost like organized chaos with him, because he knows what he's doing, and he's very, very good at his job, and he's very good at sort of reading people. Same, they both are. They're both very good at that, but in slightly different ways, and it's the approach that they take to actually dealing with them. Like there's obviously the contrast where, like you say, where Neil met Edie for the first time, and he's very guarded because he thinks at any time somebody's going to be coming after him, like the police are going to be looking for him and stuff. So when somebody introduces himself to them, when he's sitting down, the first thing he thinks of is, why are they doing this? Is it, am I trying to catch me out? Are they wearing a wire, for instance? So that's why he's so rude initially, and it's just when she explains, no, I work in the library, I've seen you come in, you take out some really interesting books, you're obviously very well read and all that, and it's only then he goes, I read enough, I recognise her, and it's not. It would have to be quite a convoluted setup for her to be a police officer in that case, because it would be very, very random. Because you can tell that he is like a very careful man. So even though he goes to the library and looks for books on like stresses and metals and all this, because all this kind of thing helps his job. Like when they're breaking into armored cars and things like that, so obviously they know how to do all that with the sort of the set charges and things like that. So he researches his job very well, but you can tell that even though he researches it, he'll probably go to like half a dozen different libraries in order to do that. So it would be very random. So then he can start trusting her, and then he kind of lets himself sort of get sucked in a wee bit after that, doesn't he? In terms of he softens a wee bit, becomes a wee bit more human and everything. Still kind of keeps it down low, but he's still involved there as well. He's still got all that. But whereas the Vincent character is just it's almost like leading. It's almost like the same sort of scent of a woman type of character in a way. It's kind of up there with that whole thing as well. But yeah, I really like the contrast between them, because it meant that they weren't competing for your attention.
Yeah, it wasn't just two men shouting at each other or at the screen for 3 hours. It was definitely like a considered character study, and you wonder if they sort of worked that out together or worked that out separately, because I'm always intrigued as to how they decided whose name went left or right. I don't know if there's a story behind that or not, but obviously they get equal billing in terms of their names are both on the screen first, but I do wonder sort of how they sort of worked out these characters sort of amongst themselves and all that sort of thing, because obviously, I mean, they'll have known each other and obviously worked around each other for such a long time, but how do you put the two of them on the screen together and not have it burst sort of thing? Yes,
and they're at the same level as well. It's not the towering
inferno.
Yeah, so where one is to the right but slightly higher and all this kind of thing. It's just, but that's egos and movie stars and like lawyers getting involved in all this sort of thing as well. So you've mentioned the dialogue and the story itself, which played a major part. What did you actually mean by that? What did you think about the way that the whole sort of story was put together?
Because I think it's not just like I don't want to use this phrase, it's not like a dumb cop movie. That's not what I mean. I mean, it's like you have to actually pay attention to this film. Like there is a lot of layers and a lot of subplots and side characters going on. So, you have to understand, like, for example, the relationship between Chris and his wife, Charlene, who obviously played by Val Kilmer and Ashley Judd, and their dynamic and what they're going through. You have to understand that Waingro is a fucking serial killer who's basically just any excuse to chop people up. You have to understand the sort of side plot with the investment banker who is working through John Voight's character of Nate in order to get these bonds stolen, like on purpose, in order to buy them back and make a profit. Like there is so much going on here as well, that it's not just a shoot 'em up type of film. Like you have to actually pay attention, because all of these sort of subplots and side characters fuel the sort of main storyline, I guess, between Vincent and Neil. And also both of these characters, despite the fact that yes, they may lose their temper and yes, they're doing dangerous things, they're not two-dimensional men who are only focused on like shootouts or things like that. Obviously Neil is very considered in terms of like his reading material and his philosophy to life. Like the way he sits and philosophizes to Chris is you know, quite deep. And Vincent, albeit he has more of a temper and is slightly more likely to let loose, he's someone who genuinely sort of cares about his job and cares about his domestic setup and is aware of his own flaws and failings, which is why he's able to say, like, this is marriage number 3 and it's not fucking working. And both of these men, although Neil says he's alone but not lonely, there is a loneliness that permeates both of them, because they're so focused on what they're doing. And I think that really comes through in the dialogue. And as I say, I do love that line about the owl, but I also really like the more sort of profound stuff about, you know, for me, the sun rises and sets with her. And I think that you need to be paying attention to what's being said, but equally what's going on in all these little subplots, because they will inform the sort of bigger picture. So it's not a switch off and look at your phone type of film. Like you have to be fully glued to the screen and paying attention to what everyone's doing and saying, more importantly.
Oh, absolutely. There is an awful lot to this film. There's a lot of strands, like you say, both your major plot and your subplots, and they all kind of feed into each other pretty much for the third act, if you like. So it all kind of comes together then, obviously. And you do need to pay attention. You do need to know why these guys are doing it. You can kind of take it on a bit of a surface level, and that is bad guys getting chased by good guys. But if you just view it on that sort of basis, then you're not going to get very much out of this film. You're going to say, well, that was okay. But if you do actually watch it and engage with the characters, then you're going to be sort of really rewarded, because the way that it's written, it's very clever, because you think some characters, especially some of the side characters, are not particularly important, but every single person in this film who has a speaking role is important. And even down to some of the sort of really sort of minor characters as well. It all comes back, it all plays out quite nicely towards the end of the film. And I was sort of really appreciative for the fact that, yes, I put my phone to the side and watched this, even though I thought, well, I've seen this before, I could just sort of skim it. But no, it's not the kind of film that you can skim. And it can be a bit of a test, given the fact that it's so long. But
I feel like it flies in. Like I feel like the way that this is sort of set up, as I say, to me, it follows like quite a clear 3-act structure, but also like the tension like very rarely settles. There's always like a new score or a new conflict, or even like pieces like of music. When, for example, when Neil first meets Edie, there's this like constant low hum in the background that you're like, oh my God, something bad's going to happen here. And so the tension just never really goes away. And I think that's, I mean, obviously it leads up to quite famous scenes that everybody sort of talks about or references when they think about Heat. But even in amongst the sort of smaller moments, there's so much going on that I just think you're absolutely glued to this from start to finish.
One reason why you think that, but you may not realise why you think it, I'm not trying to put you down, and I'm not trying to mansplain here. I must say this before we go into it. But the very opening scene of the film where they're setting up the heist, where he's going to steal the ambulance and various things like that, has a very similar drone in the background. There's this wee bag. And that does lead up to something explosive happening, whereas here...
and that's why you think that sound is a warning sign,
In a way it is, because of the way that it plays out towards the end of the film, his actions involving Edie towards the end of the film. It is kind of a warning to that, but yes, it's almost like a false sort of premise, you know. And that's something that is used very often in horror films. They have a build up in order, you're thinking there's going to be some sort of jump scare or something, and then it doesn't happen. There's a few films I've done that very successfully.
No, I definitely, but I do think that is what keeps you engaged as well, because your spidey senses start going, this is not a good sound, like this is not a good sound in the background of this. And I think it is really cleverly done, and that's why, as I say, although this was 3 hours long, this absolutely flew in for me, because I just think the tension is just never really allowed to settle. And like, this film is obviously going to end one way or another, like whether you've seen it or not. Like, I feel like you know that there's only one of 2 conclusions that can happen here, but I feel like if this is your first time watching Heat, it's not guaranteed what the ending of this film is going to be. Like, I don't feel there's a lot of clues as to who's going to come out on top, which I think is also why it works even on rewatch.
Yes, you've got to remember this is the mid-90s, and things had been changing for a while, and that it wasn't always the good guys who were coming out on top.
Yeah.
I know that was all part of the sort of the Hays Code. There had to be a certain amount of retribution. There had to be a certain amount of consequences. If somebody does a bad thing, then they'll get their comeuppance in some way. But a lot of sort of modern film from the sort of the 70s, the new Hollywood stuff, that glamorized violence in a bigger way. And go back to things like The Godfather, things like that. You know, the anti-heroes in that were the ones that you were actually rooting for. You know, they were all bad guys in these sort of films. But yes, so you're totally right. You do, if you have not seen this film, then one, why you listen to this podcast, because you should be watching the film.
We're going to get a
first.
spoilery,
yeah. And secondly, yes, you don't know what's going to happen. They even say that at one point, that it's going to go one way or another during the conversation, which we'll talk about in a moment, that it's going to go one way or another. And that leaves it very open for the audience as well, because you know both of these guys are very capable. And when they say that they're going to take somebody down, then that's what they will do that. They will follow through on that action, because they are serious people. They're not just, it's not a bravado thing. Neither of them say it in those sort of terms. But yes. So I have obviously just mentioned it, the whole centerpiece of the film. It comes roughly about halfway through the film, where Vincent and Neil actually have a face-to-face conversation. At this point in the story, the LAPD is fully aware of the gang. They have been tracking them and identifying them, and it's obvious who the leader of the gang is. But at the same time, Neil has figured out that the LAPD are onto them, and they know about them. So there's a bit of a standoff there, that they know that any information they're going to get from any tales or anything, or any conversations that they've been hearing, could be completely wrong, or they just don't know what's going on. So the way that Vincent then approaches it is, he tails Neil as he's driving, pulls him over, and then says, "Do you want to go and get a cup of coffee?" And Neil says, "Yeah, okay," and they go away. And that leads into this scene of the two of them together, sitting across from each other in a coffee shop, a crowded coffee shop as well, not some wee quiet place. It's a very, very public place, and they have a conversation. What did you think of that?
Honestly, this must be the most famous offer of a cup of coffee to ever exist, right? It all builds up to this, and you're right, you've got the hustle and bustle all around you in this diner, and again, like, the tension just does not stop, because one, you've got Al Pacino and Robert De Niro sitting across from each other in a room acting, and like both of them absolutely flawless at what they do. And then you've got Neil's character, who keeps his cards close to his chest at all times, and Robert De Niro's sitting there with his chin dipped, so his eyes are like looking up straight across to Al Pacino, and Al Pacino's moving around a little bit more because his character's obviously a little bit more frantic by this point. And they talk about like their family and their lives and their careers to date, and they talk about dreams that they've had, like these really terrible recurring nightmares about bodies and drownings and all of this sort of thing. The camera work is really simple but effective. You're just moving from one face to the other. The background noise sort of like is in peaks and troughs depending on what they're talking about. I just think the tension is unbelievable. Now, I know that they didn't rehearse this scene going in because they wanted to have that level of awkwardness with each other, two characters who knew of each other but didn't know each other. And so I think it's just a really interesting, again, the dialogue I think is so key here, because these men who to all intents and purposes, I suppose you would call them like traditional alphas, like leaders of what they do, like top of their game. And they're talking about interpreting each other's dreams. And what does that mean? Because obviously their dreams are both about death. And again, it leads into this notion of like, who is going to come out on top here? And I just think, as I say, camera work, super simple, very effective. The background noise is like authentic. You're not having that sort of paused saloon door moment where everyone stops to listen to what these two men are talking about. They could be anyone in that diner as far as everybody else is concerned. But obviously we know who they are and why they're there. And I just think it's the simplicity of the scene that makes it so powerful. Like, they're not sitting saying to each other, I'm gonna best you and I'm gonna kill you and I'm gonna do this. Like, there's no threats, there's no nonsense. It's two men having a conversation. And it is honestly one of the most powerful pieces of cinema. Like, this whole film, to me, having rewatched it yesterday, has really sort of underlined to me how brilliant this film is for so many different reasons. But this scene in particular, you're just like, this is acting like 101. This is the masterclass. This is the, how to imbue your character without actually saying too much. And as I say, they don't even talk about what each other is doing. Like, he's not saying to you, I know you're following me. And he's not saying, I know you're going to break into this particular vault. It's incredible. It's genuinely one of the most fascinating pieces of cinema because of its nothingness in a way. Like, they're not talking about threatening each other. They're not talking about how this film is going to end. They're talking about their dreams. And man, it's just so good. It's just so good.
I liked it because of the underplaying of it. There wasn't any overacting here at all, which was in a way quite surprising because Pacino tends to move towards that.
He does tend to go bigger. Yeah.
Yeah. And because we've seen so many performances from the likes of De Niro, you get to and you see his tics and the way he does things and all that. And again, he sort of tamps that right down as well. It's very low key, the performances. And like you say, it's two alpha males, two leaders, if you like, but they're good leaders because they understand that threats and intimidation won't work with each other. Just mouthing off and saying, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to bring you down, it's going to be hell. That won't work. They understand each other very well because they have such similar backgrounds and they basically know the type of person that the other one is. And that works really well. So there's no need for histrionics. There's no need for like thumping the table, making a scene. And like I say, having everybody, around them, looking directly at them, that kind of thing. So there's no need for anything like that because ultimately these two guys are very, very intelligent. And that's how they know that they can talk to each other about things like dreams and all that because they work at the same level. They're not... The reason that they are where they are is not just due to intimidation and threats and basically bullying. A lot of this is down to the fact that they can read people and they understand people and they can lead people in the way that they should actually happen. So yeah, it's very, very clever. Very good indeed. Now, this is obviously, like I say, the centerpiece, but there are two action scenes in this film as well, both reasonably well extended, I would say. You have the initial one at the start, which sets up, like we've talked about before, how the gang actually operate and what they do. And then you have the big job that they know the police has some idea of, and yet they still do it anyway because the reward is worth the risk. What did you think about how these were kind of put together? Because they're extended, especially the second one. The second one's maybe about 20 to 25 minutes long, which is just crazy. Keeping your attention for that length of time with people shooting guns,
Yeah, no, I think in a way it's almost like a film that wouldn't be made like this now when you think about sort of how typical action scenes unfold. The bank robbery and the sort of like the big heist itself is really interesting because Neil's character does have to do a bit of persuading to get all of the gang to actually commit to it because they all pretty much think so. Like Michael, Chris, they all think in particular that they're going to get caught and that there's no point in doing it, and so they have to be really persuaded to actually participate in this. And it's he explains like how they're going to get in and out, it's going to be no trouble, etc., etc. And the robbery itself is pretty heart-stopping. Like, they're, again, this sort of ticking motif comes back into the score, which again obviously underlines the fact that Neil knows that he's got however many minutes to get in and out. There are screams from the employees that echo off the marble, because of course it's like a proper like American bank where everything's like marble and stone and gold and all that sort of thing. You've got the sort of barked instructions from, you know, the crew and the threats of violence, but they're all doing it in suits as well. So there's like an element of elegance to what they're doing, and you can really hear like their shoes sort of clipping off the floor. And then you've got the way they walk out with their bags and their guns, and the police are, you know, sort of in pursuit, because they're all sort of smiling and laughing and thinking like, phew, you know, we got in and out, we did it. And then of course this leads us to like one of the most famous shootouts in cinema. You know, we talk about the diner scene being one of the most famous dialogue scenes. We then get into one of the most famous sort of action scenes. The shots are completely deafening. Seemingly they did not put the shots in post. That is live gunfire as they recorded it for sound, which is why it's, you know, so deafening. You've got people screaming, running away. You've got the glass smashing off the cars. You've got the police car blockade. The editing is fantastic. I think you've got a real mix of length of shots and also perspectives as well. So we get a lot of sort of face on and a lot of over the shoulder stuff as well. The depth of shots and the sort of alternate framing is really interesting here as well, because again, we either sit with someone right on their shoulder, or we're looking straight at them, or we've got kind of wide shot where we can see the carnage that's going on across the city. And at one point, I think I actually timed this yesterday because I'm sad, but there's 4 minutes of constant firing, which is real, because you can't hear there is some dialogue going on, but you can't really hear what's being said over the deafening sound of these gunshots. There's like a brief pause for screams, and then we're back to more shooting. And I feel like there's a really like authentic frenzy to it, especially because towards the end of it, obviously you've got Vincent's character that, you know, he has to make a decision. Does he take a shot that potentially takes out a child as well? So there's so many elements of like drama and tension and the sort of anarchic, you know, the screams of everyone running away. And I just think it's so well done. Like, it's not showy, and the sort of like, there's no big stunts and the people aren't rolling off cars and there aren't big action sequences. It all feels very, very credible. And I think that's where Heat really excels itself, is that the action is there because it's necessary to the plot. It's exactly how this thing would unfold, but also it's not done in a sort of like showy way. It's definitely done in a way that makes you feel like, fuck, this is real, and it's really scary, actually. And again, you don't know who's going to emerge sort of from this, scathed, unscathed, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it's phenomenal. And as I say, I timed it yesterday just to be sad, but I just thought it was such an interesting scene in the sense that, as you say, the whole sequence actually takes about 25 minutes, and when would you ever get that now?
Yeah, you don't get the time to do that, and there would be in the involvement of explosions and all sorts of things, and it would be in, I know it's a reasonably big scale, but it would have been a much bigger scale if it had been done now. They would feel the need to have buses blowing up and all sorts of things. Yeah. And it seems like it's almost like insurmountable odds for them, because there's only 3 of the gang who are out in the streets, and there just seems to be waves of police, which would be normal because you would get police coming in and back up, and they were aware of something going down, they just didn't know where it was going to be. The fact that they were wearing business suits as well fits in, because it's a bank they're going into, but obviously Neil wears a suit all the time. He wears a grey suit, and that's mainly to blend in more than anything else. The director had said that, yes, he's wearing a grey suit because it's kind of nondescript. He would be able to fit in everywhere he went wearing that. The escape scene, or the attempted escape scene from the bank and into the street, is used by military authorities to show the best way to actually escape, to get out of a scene, because of the way that they handled that they worked as a team together, and one would move, the next one would cover, and move and cover, and they would do that between all 3 of them, and it's used in that way to show how they should be doing that. And much to Val, I know it's crazy, isn't it? And much to Val Kilmer's delight at the time as well, it's shown as a way of the best practice in terms of reloading your weapon in these kind of situations as well. He was very pleased with that, because he's been around firearms all his life, and that he grew up with them, so he was very familiar with it, and that kind of shows in the way that he handles
Yeah.
weapon and everything, and he doesn't blink so much as the other two when they're firing it because he's used to them and he knows how to handle them and everything. I thought all these sort of wee touches that you find out afterwards, you don't know at the time, really inform it for like a second or a third watch or whatever. And I thought, yes, it was really good. And it was, I mean, it's such a statement of intent saying, right, we're going to have this fight sequence where they're firing weapons. Oh, and by the way, it's not going to be a noise you've ever heard before. It's going to be really fucking loud as well.
Yeah.
This isn't done in post-production, and it's going to be such a long time. So this doesn't happen. This, you just do not get that. And it takes somebody of Michael Mann at that time to be able to say, yeah, this is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm going to do it. So I thought, yeah, brilliant. I liked the way that the first action scene really informed how the second action scene would be shot and laid out. They used very similar techniques in both of them, like say over the shoulder.
Yeah, because they're both quite tight as well,
Yeah.
like, as in like in terms of scale. Like there's not, yes, although the truck flips in the first one, like you say, like there's not unnecessary violence or explosions or whatever going around. They're both quite tight in terms of the number of people involved is the exact number of people that need to be involved. There's not a scale to it.
Yes, yeah. And it concentrates on the story aspect of it. Even though it's action, there is a story for both of them. First one tells
absolutely.
you what the gang are about. The second one reinforces the fact that they know exactly what they're doing. They don't need to be talking to each other. There's no constant back and forward saying, right, you go and then I'll go. It's all natural. There's none of this cover me while I run for the corner of a building. It's just done because it's been a honed skill. It's just something that they could probably do without even, probably without looking, probably as well.
Yeah, well, because they all know each other and they understand.
Yes.
And in a way, like Neil knows the strengths and weaknesses of his own team. So he knows how to sort of send them in and how to get them back out again. So you do get the sense that the structure and that sort of inherent you go, then I'll go comes from him and how he likes to have things organized because he understands how his team works. Honestly, I feel like they should give this film to managers in businesses and be like, this is how you understand your team.
Yeah. Whether we take the right story from it or the right idea from it, So obviously I mentioned visual storytelling here as well. So the dialogue, even though it's important, is quite economical. There is more visual storytelling than anything else. Did you enjoy that aspect of it?
Yeah, I definitely think throughout the film as a whole, this is going to sound really weird, but I feel like it kind of showcases LA as a city. Like you've got that sort of like seedy, shadowy neon at night time. The daytime is sort of grainy, parched and full of traffic. But I do think there's a real sort of love letter to the city there in a strange way. And of course, as I said, as I talked about in the sort of like the big shootout scene, there's the editing's fantastic. There's really interesting framing going on here, lots of different cuts and shots as well. And that sort of goes throughout the film. Like when we're getting sort of in depth with certain characters, like I'm thinking of Waingro, when he obviously assaults and murders the sex worker that he's with, you get that really horrible close up of his almost kind of like Kubrick style grin that's going on here as well. As I say, at the start of the film, you had that gorgeous close up of the truck driver who was about to be shot. Like I think that Michael Mann definitely does his best to give you depth of character and also sort of an overview of the city that these men are sort of living and working in terms of, how they are going to get, like, obviously in the background of the first big heist, you've got like the freeways that are all sort of full of traffic, and that's in the background left and right of that first sort of heist. So then you understand, this is how they're getting in and out. Like I definitely think that he goes out of his way to help you understand what's pushing these characters and who they are as people through these sort of nice variety of shots, but also just like the locale that he actually places them in as well.
Yeah, totally. I think it works very well in terms of the visual storytelling because there has to be a certain economy with it. It can't all be exposition, it can't all be sort of heavy dialogue or anything. And especially with the character of Neil, he doesn't have an awful lot to say anyway. You think that he doesn't speak very often. It's all in terms of actions. Like after the first job where they'll meet at the diner and there's the three of them sitting there and he comes in and the first thing he does is he slams Waingro's face into the table. There's no chat or anything. It's just, you really messed this up, so therefore, you're in deep trouble here. And the other two just sit there quite impassively because they know this is going to happen. And there doesn't need to be any lines of dialogue. There doesn't need to be any histrionics here. It's just all action. It's all what they're going to do. And then when they take him outside in order to kill him, there's no talk about, right, you stand there and you watch the traffic and all this. They just do it because they're working as a team there as well. And that just tells you so much more than like a whole sort of page of dialogue could possibly tell you. So yeah, I thought that worked really, really well. Now, I've mentioned obviously the fact that there's other people actually in this film. It's not just Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. So the main sort of support in here comes from Val Kilmer, who, after the film was done, was asked why he took on a supporting role when he was obviously a big star at the time. And he says, well, it's very simple. I get to say Al and Bob for the rest of my life.
I love that.
I don't need to call it
but
Mr.
also,
De
like,
Niro.
you get to learn, you get to watch, and you get to soak up. Like, a lot of actors do take these roles because they want to watch the master at their craft. And yes, I can totally understand the question, because obviously 1995, this was like proper peak Val Kilmer as well. But again, I like what he does with this character. Like, his character has fallen apart at the seams. Like, his home life is not, what it should be, and he shouldn't even really have a home life as far as Neil is concerned, because obviously if he wants to be successful in the sort of gang thing. But I really like what he does with this character, and I think that anyone, I mean, you've got like John Voight, Ashley Judd, Natalie Portman in a very sort of early role as well, like Tom Sizemore. Like, anyone that's going to work is going to feel insecure about acting anywhere near Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. But actually, I think the supporting cast are phenomenal. Like, Ashley Judd's character is fascinating to me as well, because she's in this sort of like fucked up situation where she's got a kid by, Val Kilmer's Chris, and she's looking for a way out. And there's the scene in the balcony as well where, like, is she going to betray him or not? Like, there's so much to these characters. And as you say, sort of like plots that you think aren't relevant, like Natalie Portman's character, like her dad doesn't show up to pick it up in the first sort of like 20 minutes of the film, and of course that comes back round at the end of the film in a really sort of dramatic like attempt on her life as well. And I just think, even if you had maybe 6 or 7 lines in this film, like, they probably felt like the most powerful 6 or 7 lines you'd been given in your career at that point, because everyone does a really good job. I really like Amy Brenneman's Edie as well. Like, I love you can see that she's like a sort of kind of romantic character, even the fact that she works in a library. She's this kind of like hopeless romantic, but obviously that's not who Neil is looking for. I like Diane Venoda's Justine, because I think she's more than game for Vincent in terms of personality and fire and everything that she's got going on. So yeah, even if you've just got like a few lines, like, everyone is like properly like at the top of their game there. And I suppose you would feel like you had to be against these two big stars,
Oh yeah, everybody, there's nowhere to hide when you're in these sort of roles, definitely. And if you are bad in it, it will stand out because there's such high caliber otherwise. Yeah, I thought the supporting cast was excellent in this. Val Kilmer, like I say, surprised me because I enjoyed his performance more. I got more into the character of the fact that this guy was completely fucked up in terms of his personal life.
He's kind of pathetic.
Yeah, but it didn't impact his work. He was still as professional as ever. That it would have been very easy for him to be written in that way, that he was the one that messed up during one of the jobs.
Exactly.
Everything's going on, but this went, no, that doesn't happen. The guy knows what he's doing. He's a professional. Obviously, he's got one of the reasons why they do the final job is he says, I really need to do this, and I need the, I need this for my fresh start and all that. But to caveat that, he says, but I'll do whatever you say, Neil. So he's obviously completely loyal to him as well. So I really like that. The fact that, yes, he is a secondary character, but there's enough space in this film to allow him to have his moments. But again, without going into too much depth in the character, because that's not the point of this film. You don't need to know, like, fair enough, you get the Ashley Judd stuff and the whole family stuff, but you don't get like a lot of background into these guys. Apart from
you have no idea why Chris has joined up with Neil and how he's ended up how he met Charlene, for example. And you don't need to know. You just need to know that at this present moment in time, personally, he is a mess, and he's struggling with the sort of divide between work and life, and that he's looking for a fresh start. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, definitely. And I like the fact that there was at least one scene where they were all together, like that, having the meal together.
Yeah.
And they were all there, and Neil was there on his own, even though Edie was in his life at that point. He was still keeping that element of it separate because there's a certain professionalism to him with regards to everything he does work-wise. And let's face it, as a job, he's a manager, like you say. Even in sort of personal circumstances, he keeps that separation between what his personal life is and what everybody else is, because everybody else was there and they're quite open and they were their partners and everything and all that kind of thing. And it was kind of chatty and nice and all that, but he was still, even then, still buttoned down a wee bit, still letting everybody else talking, but taking everything in that was going on in the situation, and obviously figuring out that there was problems big problems in Chris's relationship as well, and obviously he went and did something about that. But I mean, there's all sorts of people in this film that we haven't even met. Obviously John Voight is in this film as well, and in the role of a sort of facilitator for the gang. He's the sort of middleman that brings in the jobs and all that. I thought he was excellent in this.
I definitely think he'd taken his hair from Ed Harris in Love Lies Bleeding. It was almost that kind of vibe.
Yeah, there's a certain seediness to his character. You've got to remember, this was a year before he did the Mission Impossible film as well in 1996.
That's mad.
So it's really, really weird as well. So the fact that, obviously a bit, I say weird, but I mean, these guys are actors. They're supposed to be able to inhabit characters. So yeah, you do forget that at times, I suppose. So of all the supporting characters, which was your standout performance?
Oh, that's really hard because my heart says Val Kilmer always. I love that scene on the balcony where Charlene goes out to look and his smile sort of fades slightly because he thinks that he knows that like she's potentially going to betray him, and they've cut his hair by this point as well. So my heart says Val Kilmer. However, Kevin Gage as Waingro scares the living bejesus out of me in this film, because he's such a loose cannon. Like, he's not like Tom Sizemore's Michael and Val Kilmer's Chris have like a level of professionalism when they go on these jobs. You know, they listen to Neil, they follow the instructions, they get in, they get out. He's just wild. And the scene in particular where he kills that young sex worker is really, really scary to me, because I think like you just know this man is completely unhinged and that there's absolutely no way that he will stop. And obviously Neil's decision to go back and pursue him sort of changes the end of the film. Neil could obviously have got away. He doesn't. He stops at this particular hotel to try and track down Waingro. So I think Kevin Gage gives a really, really excellent performance in terms of how scary he is with very little screen time. But I also really like both Amy Brenneman and Diane Venora, and actually Ashley Judd as well, as the three sort of women in the lives of these sort of leading men as well, because they're not just a sort of two-dimensional sort of like feisty bits on the side or whatever. There's definitely like a whole background story there that, as you said, we don't get, but you get a sense of. So yeah, the short answer for that is we'll just go with Val Kilmer, and I'll just stop talking.
Yeah. Well, considering you've named pretty much the rest of the cast.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, it's difficult to choose. I would say Val Kilmer as well, because of the impact that his character has in the story, which I didn't realise the first time, and I was so wrong.
Right in the fields.
Yes, right in the fields. Yes. So we've pretty much covered this film. We've spoken about it at length for quite a while now. Is there anything you think I've missed?
I definitely think the ending is worth talking about without going into too much spoiler territory. I love the fact that it's set in an airfield, and so you're either blinded by light or in complete shadow. So there's like, I mean, literally it's like the battle of like good versus evil, or whatever you want to call it. And then that glorious sort of close-up of Al Pacino's face, the music swells again, and it's a really powerful ending. And I genuinely think that if you were watching this from the first time, you would not be sure how this is going to go, but I think that the score really comes into its own there. And I think it's just a phenomenal film. Like this, as I said, is not just peak 90s cinema. I feel like this is like peak cinema.
Yep, and there's no dialogue for the last 10 minutes of the film at all. It's just it's all done with visual storytelling, and it works so well because of that. And I like the whole light and dark thing as well. That works particularly well. And the fact that the way they were able to engineer the story so it was a standoff between two guys. And you're right, it can go either way because they're both very good at the job, and they have proven during the course of the film that they're very capable of what they do.
Yeah.
They can both kill, and they're not. There's not going to be an element to this where there's like a big shootout and that they keep missing each other because that's what tends to happen. That you know that's not going to happen here. So there's a certain amount of tension because one bullet can make all the difference. And it can go either way, and we haven't given anything away here. It's quite surprising.
Nope, we absolutely have not.
Yes. So Heat, I take it's a recommendation.
Oh, every time. I'm so glad we talked about that, and that gave me an excuse to rewatch it, because honestly, what a film. I feel like I've gone through a roller coaster of emotions just talking about it.
Yeah. And for me, it's definitely a recommendation from me. Well, I don't think the film community will be too troubled with the fact that we both liked it, given it is a classic, and it's still regarded as one as well. I think it's like 8.3 on IMDb for whatever that's worth as well. So, but it is a highly regarded movie. Moving on from there to a second film of the day, Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead.
Hey, I ever tell you about Jimmy the Saint?
Jimmy the Saint was a good man.
You're different, Jimmy. You got decency.
Who left behind a bad world.
You glide.
I glide?
You glide. It's a very attractive quality. You're a thing to be amazed by.
Then one day, the old boss forced him back.
Why me?
I gotta call in the note.
What do you want done? It's just an action. It's not a piece of work.
Look at this. All the Pig brothers from back in the day.
One-shot deal. We're in, we're out.
Are you in?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You still crazy, man?
Well, I am what I am.
Now, this is a very different beast. It's still a crime film. It's got leanings towards gangsters and things like that as well. But this film, you could say, is a direct reaction to the rise of Quentin Tarantino. Over a couple of years before that, we had Reservoir Dogs in 92 and Pulp Fiction in 94. And this just so happens it comes out in 1995. I don't think that's an accident somehow. This is a film that's directed by Gary Fleder from a screenplay by Scott Rosenberg. Look up Scott Rosenberg. He has an impressive track record to this day as a writer and producer. Stars Andy Garcia, Christopher Lloyd, William Forsythe, Bill Nunn, Treat Williams, Jack Warden, and Steve Buscemi. It is the story of a job or an action, as they call it, that goes wrong. Oh, I forgot to mention. Yeah, I did mention Christopher Walken, didn't I? No, I didn't mention Christopher Walken at all. He's in it as well. Now, this is a film that is set in Denver over the course of a couple of days, where the character of Jimmy the Saint, played by Andy Garcia, who is running a scam business at the time.
Oh, I know, and it's the worst and most cruel scam ever.
Yeah, it is a particularly heinous one. He is brought in by the local, well, you would think he's some sort of a local mafia don guy, but it's never explained. But he's basically in charge. He's known as the man with the plan. He's never given a name here at all. And he tasks Jimmy the Saint with a job which involves scaring off the boyfriend of a former girlfriend of his son. And it's something nice and easy, in and out, threaten him, make sure he disappears, and make sure he leaves the girl so that his son can get back with this particular girl. Now, the son himself is completely off the rails because the opening scene of this film is relatively unpleasant to watch, and we shall touch on that in just a moment. So, with this film being in 1995 as well, but probably not as well known, what's your background with this one?
So I haven't seen it at all until we spoke about it. A really stacked cast when I looked it up, so I had quite high expectations going in. The title seemed kind of funny, like almost kind of sort of quirky, sort of offbeat. I thought might be some like black comedy in there, which there definitely is. I think the issue that I have with this film is that I watched it directly after Heat. And so
Yes.
nothing is ever going to live up to how good Heat was. And I found myself getting annoyed with certain elements of this film, or just kind of switching off from certain elements because I just thought, oh, this is just not as good. And I feel like if I'd watched them the other way around, I would have probably had a lot more fun with this. So I'm kind of kicking myself that I did it that way. But there's definitely good stuff to talk about and interesting stuff to talk about, but there's also stuff where I feel like maybe it just wasn't as good as it could have been given the talent that was available, or in it, whatever you would call it.
Mm-hmm. So as I teased during the introduction to this film, the very opening scene of the film
give me the willies.
has the son of the man with the plan standing outside of a schoolyard, watching children. They're playing skipping ropes and things like that, and he is watching. He's almost salivating.
Oh, he's licking his lips. Yeah.
Yeah. At first I thought maybe one of them was his daughter, but that turns out not to be the case, and he basically jumps over the fence and tries to. Well, I don't know what his intentions were, but obviously not good. And that is explained later on that his intentions probably were not very good at all. And he obviously gets apprehended. And the reasoning that's given behind this, not that he's just a paedophile, is that he was kind of broken when this girl broke up with him and took off with another guy and had a relationship. Which it's never really explained, but you kind of get the impression that she thought she was making a bit of a lucky escape from.
Yes, 100%.
Well. So, what did you think of that opening scene? Was it what you expected at the start of this film?
No, like as I say, I feel like the title of this film almost makes it sound like a wee bit like a comedy. And so it starts off, you've got the kids singing this sort of jump rope song, and then it like does the sort of drone shot right into the playground, and then you've got him sort of pressed up against the fence, as you say, like licking his lips, salivating, and then this, quite large gentleman scales a fence, and he goes over to show a girl like a ball or something, and I kind of thought maybe he was like a wee bit challenged mentally, because I wondered if he maybe thought that he was on the same level as the children, but no, it turns out he is just a nonce. And then she screams, obviously she's like a sort of like wise talking like street kid who basically tells him to piss off. She's not like this like small little girl who's like, oh no, what will I do? She's just like, what are you doing here? Piss off. And so all the parents like jump on him and start sort of piling in to get him away from this kid. So generally did not see that being the start to this film. But then you cut to Andy Garcia looking absolutely fucking gorgeous in a soft top, and I was like, okay, I'll give this film a chance.
Yeah, apparently it's an Oldsmobile 71 soft top. I looked it up. I'm sure Chris will know that completely off the cuff. Yeah. You'll be able to tell us about the modifications and everything to it. So, yes, but it is a pretty cool opening introduction to gorgeous. The character. Yeah. It's very unsettling, the very first scene, I thought, because it's not what I was expecting at all. Now, I was like you, I have never seen this film before. I have been aware of it for years, and that it's been talked about in terms of output that's come from the rise of Quentin Tarantino, but it's not something that there's always been something else of want to watch. So this was an opportunity to watch this film, even though it is now 30 years old. So it was always kind of on the list of things, I would catch up with it, but I was not expecting the opening scene of, in a playground. I didn't think this isn't what gangster films are normally like. Yeah, because there's like a general rule with gangster films that they don't have these sort of elements to them with children and stuff. It's really adults on adults.
Yeah, men pursuing men. Yeah,
that kind of thing. So it is very sort of macho, and this is kind of something different. So yes, I did like that. And then obviously, like you say, you're introduced to the world of Jimmy the Saint, and yes, quite. So in terms of that, what did you think of the character of Jimmy more than anything else? What did you think about him and his relationship with everyone around him?
So similar to Neil and Vincent, Jimmy the Saint is a very sharp-suited gentleman. There, he obviously was involved with sort of like actual mafia at some point, but unlike the two of them, you know, Jimmy seems really intent in the pursuit of love, despite the price in his head at various points in the film. When he first meets Dagny in the bar, genuinely, if Andy Garcia had chatted me up like that, it would be that Bruce Almighty gif where he literally rips his clothes off in one fell swoop. He is smooth AF, as the kids would say in this, but he's a very interesting character in the sense that he's been tasked with leading this gang of misfits, as we'll come on to describe, but he's not very good at it. So he's not a leader in the sense that Neil and Vincent are. Like, he cannot control this ragtag bunch of men that he's been set on this job with. So he's an interesting character in the sense that he portrays a certain image, but the reality is very different. And obviously his hustle, if you want to call it that, the afterlife advice, and we see these videos sort of throughout the film, is a very kind of like seedy line of work. You know, it's people pass on advice to their loved ones after their death, but obviously like the tapes, just you can tell that he's just making money out of it and the tapes won't actually go anywhere. So yeah, I think it's Jack Warden, who of course was in While You Were Sleeping. I think it's how he describes Jimmy the Saint as the bitch's bastard in his little opening monologue, and I thought, yeah, okay, this is cool. I'm interested in this character.
It's a totally different type of character to anything that we've seen in terms of like from the previous film. It's not the same at all. The guy's a hustler. There's a certain desperation to him as well. He's polished, but it's all kind of a veneer, isn't it? There's a lot going on underneath, which is he's just scrambling about, looking for the next payday, and he's obviously invested an awful lot into his scam, and it's not quite paying out in the way that he would hope, because he's relying on people signing up for this who have loved ones who are dying so they can record them, which is kind of sick in the first place. But then you've got to wonder about what sort of advice they're going to be able to impart to people. You know, the whole premise of it was that people would come along after this person has died and they may have a specific problem, and they would be given this sage advice by their loved ones on this. But I mean, a couple of hours worth of videotaping is not going to impart knowledge that's going to be useful for 20 or 30 years hence. You know, they're going to go along a couple of times and say, no, well, you told me that the last time, so you know. You know, there's only so many
it's just like pre-recorded junk. It's like a magic 8-ball. You shake it and you get
they're basically coming along and then getting told, you know, remember, many a mickle makes a muckle, so that's what it's all about. So yes, the whole premise of it was a bit weird as well. But then obviously you get to understand why he's in this position, because he's a subordinate. He's not a leader. He is somebody who is reasonably high up the food chain, but he still has to sort of kowtow if someone wants to see him. Like when the main boss wants to see him, he had to drop everything and go and see him. It wasn't like, yeah, well, I'll make an appointment. It's no, you're coming now, and he'd had to see you. Fair enough. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting character, because there's an awful lot going on there and he's got to figure this out. The fact that he can pull together a team to do a job and he knows all these people is obviously, there is a certain leadership thing about him, because people do look up to him, people respect him, people say hello to him, and you know, all this kind of thing. But yes, it's not quite on that same sort of level as it was. So what did you think of the story in this instance here? So, like I say, it's introduced with this rather disturbing opening, and then the job that they have to do. Now, were you intrigued by this? Did you know how it was going to go as well? That's kind of interesting.
Definitely not. Like, I think that, don't get me wrong, like the story is quite straightforward. Essentially, Jimmy has to assemble a crew, frighten this man, and that should be the end of it. But of course, it's never that simple, is it? So obviously you have all these different things that go wrong, and the crew themselves are just absolutely useless. I really liked the premise of it. I felt like the execution is maybe what let it down a little bit. Like, I think there was some really good black humor, some nice little bits of romance, some really quite funny, like sharp dialogue. But I just felt it was a bit too chaotic, and in a way that we've said obviously about Heat, like you didn't necessarily need to know all the characters' backstories. I felt like these characters you knew, apart from maybe Jimmy, you knew absolutely nothing about them. And they were all sort of they'd all cranked it up to 11 essentially to play these sort of like, I don't know, like members of a team, like with all their weird nicknames and stuff like that. And so I struggled to get into this definitely as much. I like the character introductions, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Like, I thought they were really, really funny. And there were certain scenes of the film when I was genuinely laughing out loud at. But I just think that maybe, I don't know, it felt a bit rushed and a bit chaotic at times and a bit sort of like, oh, now we're here chasing this character and now we're doing this. And so that I struggled with. And the ending in particular, I was just like, what the fuck? It really sort of knocked me for 6 in that way. So yeah, I couldn't get into this as much. And as I say, I was kind of spoiled because I did watch Heat first. But yeah, there's good and bad. The story, as I say, was an interesting premise. I just don't think it was executed in the best possible way.
I would agree with you in that regard. It's half of a good story, and anything leading up to the job works for me. But it was after that it didn't quite have any sort of traction with me. I was getting a wee bit bored with some of it as well, which was it was a bit of a shame because I was looking forward to watching it, which it's never good. You're right. It felt as well for me. It felt as if they were very much of the opinion that this had to be a film like a Quentin Tarantino film. It had to be fast paced. It had to have certain dialogue, which I'll ask you a question about in a moment, and it had to have this array of characters where
everyone's got a quirk.
It didn't quite work for me in those terms with the characters, because when you get introduced to Jimmy the Saint, he does know what he's doing, but then he makes several decisions that basically inform the second half of the film, and he basically knows that there's a high chance that this is going to happen because of one of the choices he makes with the setup of the job. So yeah, I didn't particularly like that so much. So in terms of the dialogue and the script, did you find it easy to get into it, given that some of it was very sort of stylized, the way they were speaking, and they were speaking a certain slang as well? Did you struggle, or were you okay with that?
No, I definitely struggled. Like, I would say that there's a lot of rapid fire dialogue and obviously like insults and slurs that you could tell they were an insult or a slur because the way the line had been delivered, but I'd never maybe heard the word before. There's a lot of dark humor, and I did feel that was doing a lot of the heavy lifting because, as I say, the visuals maybe in the characters just weren't that interesting. But it certainly has its own style, I guess. I think it was maybe trying to be that sort of like, as you say, that kind of Tarantino-esque type of jive talking. Would you call it that? Am I 4,000 years old for saying that? But no, but I don't think I don't think it was quite on the, as I say, nice idea, poor execution, which I think could be said about a lot of the things in this film.
Yeah, apparently they took the dialogue from like prison slang, and they took it from all sorts of sources. Some of it they basically just made up.
I mean, and that's fine. Like, I have no issue with that, but I think it's just because some of it was like, in particular scene, I'm thinking like of the scene where the gang all first meet and they end up brawling in the malt shop with a child's birthday party looking on in the background. Like, some of that I was just like, oh, I'm not really sure what that word is or whatever, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to understand everything. It's obviously just like a slur or whatever. But yeah, I definitely felt like for the first half of the film anyway, up until a certain point, I felt like the dialogue and the humor was doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, and I think they kind of realised that at one point, because the character of Joe Heff, played by Jack Warden, they would intersperse him holding court.
His monologues, were funny as fuck.
In the malt shop. So, but he would be explaining some of the terms and things like that as well. So he would explain, for instance, they don't shake hands, they palm up to each other. And that's because of a prison thing where there's a piece of glass or a piece of perspex between a prisoner and somebody who's visiting them. So there was no physical contact, so therefore they were actually putting their hand up to the glass, and that was like touching it, and that just kept going from there. So that tells you that they were all ex-cons, and that's how they knew each other. as well. So yes, that was good, but there were like lots of wee bits in there where I was kind of going, why are you saying that? What does that actually mean? You know, it didn't make sense to me to begin with, because they kept saying, yeah, give it a name during like dialogue scenes, and I was going, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's obviously means something to that. It's like, yeah, you've explained it or something like that. So I kind of took it from that. You know, you basically labeled it. You put a label on something so it's everybody can understand what it is. But that wasn't particularly clear, and I was getting a wee bit confused by that. And then you would have things like a fecal freak, and you're saying, what is that? And then that was explained.
I felt like that one was self-explanatory though. Like I feel like anything with the word fecal, I was like, I don't need to hear what this means.
Well, I kind of took it in two ways. I thought I took it in a kind of derogatory homosexual way as well.
Yeah, I get that.
It could have been taken that way as well as
because he'd been in prison.
Yeah. So it was like one of two ways that I could take it in, and it was obviously explained in more detail than I actually needed.
Yes, As soon as they started, I was like, okay, I could have lived without that explanation for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it was just the one line where he says, it's kind of spongy, and you're going, again, didn't need that, thanks.
Yeah. So. Benefit of the listener, I think actual sick has just come up with my mouth again.
Yes. So, Mr. Garcia himself, what did you think of his performance?
Like I said, I thought he was like very charming, very schmoozy, very romantic, which was an odd element of the film given everything else that was going on. Like I definitely feel like you got the sense of his, like, as you say, like his desperation, his hustle, his desire to put some cash behind him, because obviously they were kind of slagging him off about like where his suits were from, like his hair was perfectly coiffured, like he obviously has the good car. But as you say, he's completely the beck and call of the man with the plan. So I thought he was definitely one of the more interesting performances in this. I feel like the rest of them, even though, as I say, you've got some big names in there, were quite two-dimensional. Like even Christopher Walken was not really doing, he was like literally a mustache twirling bad guy and talking about his erections, despite the fact that he was in a wheelchair, which again, information I could have absolutely done without. But I feel like Andy Garcia, is one of the better performances in this, simply because I feel like you get more of a sense of who his character is compared to the others. I feel like they're a wee bit too much like trying to be these kind of eccentric, sort of out there, like on the fringes of society guys, and that's not who he is, obviously.
I did like the character of Jimmy the Saint, because there was a certain desperation about him at all times, and it was kind of spiraling out of control. And then obviously events that happened, first obviously getting the call from the man from the plan, then getting the job, and the job going wrong, which I won't go into any further, obviously, for spoiler reasons. And at the same time, he gets the thunderbolt. He sees a woman that he basically falls in love with as soon as he sees her. And you can tell that the lines he used were practiced lines.
100%. He'd said them to himself in the mirror or on other women. 100%.
But it actually felt as if he meant it that time, in the way that he conducted himself with his relationship with Dagny to begin with, like setting rules, kind of sex on the first date and all this kind of thing. I thought that was really nice, and it kind of counterpoint the fact that his whole, everything else is horrible, everything else is rubbish that he's dealing with, and there's this very nice thing, but there's the whole sort of overall aspect of, this is typical that he meets somebody that he basically wants to be with all the time in the middle of all this other shit going on that's basically affecting his life and basically affecting whether he can survive to the end of the film or not. Now, that's what we've sort of skirted around here and not talked about, is the title of the film. Like you said at the start, sounds as if it's a bit of a comedy. Now, the whole reasoning from what I can see for the title of the film is, with this job going wrong, there's going to be a certain amount of retribution. There's going to, they basically play it out in that way with Mr. Coming into town in order to carry out hits on everybody who's involved in the job. So basically they are Walking Dead men. So that's where the title comes from, things to do in Denver when you're dead. Like, how are they going to spend the last hours? I think. Did you get that sort of same sense?
Yeah, I
well?
definitely, as soon as that job went wrong, because obviously the man with the plan said that it couldn't go wrong. So as soon as that job went wrong, you were like, well, you're all fucked, basically. And so, yeah, they have like maybe like a day or two of like trying to get out of town, as it were. And they all sort of scuttle off and either disappear or try to actually like pack up their shit and go. But yeah, I think everyone is aware that the clock is ticking, as it were, and so it's how to spend your last few days or hours. Again, I was intrigued by the premise of Mr. Shh and Steve Buscemi, obviously, given some sort of potency to that role. So I like that element of the film, and I guess like the way he sort of goes to town on some of the characters, I think is quite funny. But again, yeah, just like maybe didn't live up to quite as violent or as tense or as exciting as what I was expecting. Like I feel like everyone's got like these cool little like nicknames and stuff in this film, but nothing quite plays out the way you think it's going to in a bad way. Unfortunately, it just doesn't quite get there. It has so many good ideas, like and even the title, like and the sort of quirkiness of the characters, like it does have these really, really good ideas, but then it sort of drags you off in 15 different directions and doesn't ever quite, like, whereas Heat sort of wraps things up, this just kind of feels like a bit of a mess. And like maybe there was other versions of the script and maybe there was other elements to the script that might have got cut. I don't know, like there's just something lacking that never quite just doesn't quite get it over the finish line the way that you would hope it would.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. It just didn't work in the way that I kind of expected based on the first half of the film. But I thought the first half was particularly good. It was good build up. It was quirky, and the fact that I didn't tune into it very quickly was another reason that I kept watching it, because I was obviously interested to find out, these different characters like Critical Bill and Big Bear franchise and Pieces. They've all got these nicknames and stuff, but I didn't think it really worked over the course of the film. Do you think the pace of it was just all over the place? Or?
Yeah, I really don't feel the pacing is good here at all, despite the fact that it's the shorter film by like over an hour. I feel like the sense of threat is there, but the tension maybe isn't like sort of underpinning it all. And then I also sort of got to a point where I was like, is this film undermining itself with all of the quips? Because maybe I'm not feeling the tension and the threat because they're still, making wisecracks or cutting back to one of Jack Warden's monologues. Like maybe I'm not feeling as scared as I should be of this Mr. Shush or the man with the plan, because there's still sort of, there's a love story going on. And as I say, they're making jokes. Like they obviously kept cutting back to Christopher Lloyd's character Pieces, who basically like runs porn films in a sort of dodgy cinema. So every so often you were just getting like porn noises while a serious conversation was going on in the background about, like how they're all going to survive this. And so I did feel like at a certain point it was starting to sort of, as I say, undermine itself by trying to retain these sort of eccentricities and quips when actually you should have been feeling like more scared for the characters because the threat was there. So it just didn't work.
Yeah, I felt that it was well paced up until the job went wrong, and then after that,
I
was kind of thinking
it
doesn't really work after that point, because you get more into the romantic relationship between Jimmy and Dagny, which drags on a wee bit, unfortunately.
It does.
They basically go over the same ground, maybe 2, possibly even 3 times in the second half of the film, and it's completely unnecessary. The added elements in there, like obviously she was in a relationship with somebody else who wanted to marry her as well, and you're kind of thinking,
out of nowhere.
Yeah, do you need this? It's because at first she says she's just seeing this guy casually. It's just seeing somebody else, but it's not really anything. And then they have a scene in, is it an art gallery? And it's all, are we having an affair? This kind of going, why you don't need this to forward on the story in any way. It just seems like almost like an interlude. It's reinforcing points that have been fully explained previously.
Yeah.
Which is a real shame, because I wanted to I really did want to like this.
Yeah. And I completely agree, and I wanted to like it, and I did like it up until, as I say, the heist or whatever you want to call it goes wrong, and then it just became like they were adding in like the storylines with like Lucinda, who was the sex worker who obviously kept getting beaten up, and then she wanted to have a baby and all this sort of thing, and I was like, where is this going? Because I'm starting to not care about any of these characters, which is such a shame, because the way they're all introduced is really fun. Like, you know, Critical Bill, the first time we meet him, he's boxing a corpse because he's trying to, you know, he works in a funeral parlor, but he's also trying to keep fit because that's what his parole officers told him, find a hobby that keeps you occupied, and he's boxing. Like, there's stuff that's really, really funny, and even the heist itself, while it's going wrong, I did find myself chuckling at it, and I thought, oh, this is actually quite funny. And then it just all becomes a mess, and there's these characters and plot lines that you're just like, I don't care about any of this. And that's a real shame, because I feel like it's a film that starts off with a lot of promise and never quite lives up to that.
Yeah, you can, I know I've mentioned it before, but you can see the sort of Tarantino style DNA of this film.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And it has been done in a lesser way than, it's obviously been done in a quicker and a cheaper way, I think, than Tarantino film, because there's not the same emphasis on character. They don't develop characters in the same way. They're all fully formed quirks, I feel like. Nobody's normal in this film. Have you noticed that? There's not a single person.
No.
Yeah. Everybody, and you need a balance between that. You need
the voice of reason somewhere.
Yeah. You don't need one quirky character after another with a nickname and a way of talking that you don't understand. Every single character spoke in riddles in this film, which, especially the man with the plan, he never would say, you know, he wouldn't say something straightforward. It was always, you know, as if he's holding court. It's just, it's always like a monologue. You could have been doing that as a one-man show, if you like. His subordinates and things like that, they were all basically nothing characters, which was a real shame. It's just that, you know, one saving grace from this, and it's another lesson I've taken from Tarantino, was the soundtrack. I thought the soundtrack was pretty decent in this film. It's obviously all needle drops, and it starts off with a Tom Waits song to begin with, which is quite a nice wee touch as well. So I did like that. But did you think anything the soundtrack or?
Yeah, no, I definitely thought it, as you say, it was a sort of collection of kind of like, I don't want to say pop, but like sort of like offbeat, maybe like kind of quirky, again, like kind of quirky sort of soundtrack, quirky sort of songs. Tom Waits, there was a couple like kind of like blues kind of sort of songs sounding in there as well. There was obviously scenes in clubs where you could hear people singing that was quite cool as well. But even that, I sort of slowly lost interest in as well, because I was like, can we skip to the next scene, because I'm over this now. And I feel like that's a shame, because there definitely were elements of it that probably if I went back and rewatched it, I'd be like, oh, that was a cool little touch. I would have liked that. I'd like to see more of that. But actually, I really struggled to care for this I would say like maybe the second hour. It's only 2 hours long. I really struggled to care for the whole second hour. So things like even paying attention to soundtrack and stuff went out the window, because I was like, can I just get this to the end of this film? If I'm being completely honest. So yeah, I mean, it starts off obviously with the little kids singing as well, which is quite creepy compared to the rest of the soundtrack. But I'm afraid that I almost stopped paying attention, if I'm being completely honest, to points like that, because I just wanted it to end.
See, if you went into this film without knowing what the title of it was, would you think it was set in Denver?
No, you wouldn't know.
No.
Because I almost felt like Denver would have been like more of a focal point as well. Like they would have referenced some sort of like well-known monument or scene or something, but it literally, because they're in and out of bars or seedy little like cinemas or the malt shop and stuff like that, but there's nothing in it. Like, I'm not saying like it has to be like, you know, there's a ski resort in the background or something like that, but it's not very like, it's not coded towards that particular city. I feel like, again, that was maybe just picked because it sounded a little bit sort of quirky and different.
Yes, it could have been downtown LA as far as the film goes, because it looked very generic as far as I was concerned, because the way, obviously you're talking about the sort of dark, dirty nighttime shots, but see, during the daytime it's all nice and bright everywhere.
Yeah,
like sunshine. And obviously Denver is like that because it was filmed in Denver. It's not as if it was filmed somewhere else
Right,
pretending to be
okay.
Denver, but there was nothing there that actually made you think that. It was almost as if it was disguised, because obviously, films that are made on location are made on places that look like
A
what you
certain way.
think they look like.
Yeah,
Like cities, like Budapest and Glasgow and all that, standing in for like New York, sort of turn of the century New York and all, because of the old buildings, or even World War Z and things like that. It's Philadelphia, wasn't it? It stood in for
yeah.
there. Yeah. So, so why have a film set in a location with the location in its title and then not exploit that in any way?
I know,
don't
because
get
you
it.
kind of thought as they were going to sort of make their escape or something like that, obviously when they realised that they've got a bounty on their heads, that they would somehow use Denver and it's sort of like it's forest or it's mountains or something like that. You would expect them to use that, but they don't. And in fact, a lot of it feels like quite dark, because especially like when Jimmy has to go see the man with the plan, that's all very shadowy. The only light you get is from that little red and white checkered like stained glass window. The nightclubs are all dark. The malt shop is a little bit lighter and more sort of like kind of pastel colored, but even that is ruined. As I say, there's a scene with like a kid's like birthday party, and it's very like family friendly, and they're all talking about like eating shit in prison and stuff like that, and it becomes this big brawl thing as well. So even that is maybe not the sort of family friendly place you anticipate. But yeah, I mean, it literally could have been set anywhere. Like it almost sort of made no difference to, because you're just sort of moving from one indoor location to the next.
Okay, given everything we've talked about, would you recommend this film?
Oh, no, I'm really sorry. I had such high hopes for this. And as I say, it's a really stacked cast. Like it's genuinely impressive. And Andy Garcia does look so handsome in this. But it's just not worth it. It's 2 hours of your life. I just think if you're gonna commit to a film, just commit to Heat. Just stick around another extra hour and just watch that instead. Like the dark humor and the dialogue up until a point is funny and engaging, but yeah, it's a film with two halves. The first half being like, oh, I'm going to give this a go. The second half being, this is a complete mess. So sorry, it's a non-recommendation from me.
Yep, following on from previous second films in our 95 marathon of the American president and Rob Roy, I'm afraid I can't recommend this film. It seems to be my secondary choices in this marathon are the poorer of the two. It is a real shame. I had hopes for this film because I had read about it previously and I thought it would be fun, but unfortunately it kind of dropped off a cliff in the second half, and there was I was glad when it finished, which is never a good sign for a film, because I was happy not to have to revisit any of these characters because most of them end up dead, so we're all good here. Yes.
Yeah, there's not going to be the threat of a sequel. I will say though that in the second half of the film, the one thing that saved it was there is a shot of Andy Garcia bloodied and bruised and somehow making drinking a malted milk look cool. That was like a real highlight of the second half of this film, because even the ending, I don't get it. Like I understand. I mean, I don't mean to make it last scene. I completely understand that was like an allusion to the afterlife thing. But even Andy Garcia's decisions in the last like 15-20 minutes, I was just like, what the hell is going on here? And yeah, like you, I was glad when the credits rolled, and it's just not a good sign for a film, is it?
No, definitely not. And it is kind of infuriating because they set up Jimmy the Saint to be a particular type of character, and then they just blow that all away by the decisions he makes, because he wouldn't be in the position he's in. He wouldn't have the respect. Obviously, he's done a bit of time and everything, but he wouldn't have the respect from his peers through making the decisions that he made in this film.
Yes, exactly. Like if he was so shit at his job, like he would not have all these people around. He would not have this sort of like air around him of being like someone who is to be looked up to. Yes, obviously people that are looking up to him are absolutely fucking useless misfits, and maybe they would just look up to anyone. But you feel like he does have this air about him that he was this sort of like one time like sort of big gun or whatever. So yeah, you don't get there by making like absolutely fucking nonsensical decisions.
Yeah. It can be. The film can be basically said in one sentence: I am Godzilla and you are Japan. That's basically what it can come down to. And you're kind of going, well, that kind of sums up everything without actually needing to talk about the film. We could have just done that. I could have just said that on for the second film. There you go. There's your one-liner.
They don't see the title though. That's the only thing. So we didn't get to do our applause.
Yeah. Very remiss on our part. So that's us for today. We have covered another 2 films from 1995. We will be continuing this for the rest of the year, unless obviously we end up in a fiery ball before sometime soon, which could possibly happen. You just never know. If you liked and enjoyed this podcast or any of our podcasts, then please leave us a wee message, leave us a review on the podcast app of your choice. It would be interesting to hear from you what you think about our marathon so far and what you think about these 2 particular films. Have you seen them? Did you enjoy them? Did you agree or disagree with our takes on it? Anything at all, please do get in touch. You can find us at the usual places on social media. We do have a presence there. Just do a wee search for Moviescramble. If you'd like to send us an email, it is podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. So until the next time, where we are possibly going to be doing a look back at the 28 franchise as it's now become. So we're ahead of 28 years later. We will be looking at 28 days and 28 weeks later as a wee double bill as well. But as always, if there's anything you think we could cover, anything you'd like to hear us chat about, then please do get in touch. So until the next time, cheerio.
Bye.